Okay, Pickle. Let's talk about the 2020 Texas high school football season and something that came about kind of by necessity, and now it's one of those things of should we keep it. You remember on Friday we had a conversation, a fun, lighthearted conversation here on Texas Football Today, as we are wont to do, about things that have come about during the pandemic, during the pandy. The Rona. Things that have come about that we're like, you know what? If this continues,
I wouldn't be mad about it.
We talked about, like, getting everything delivered.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about, you had another thing. We talked
I had
about, like,
a couple things. Hand sanitizing stations.
Washing your hands.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Cleanliness. Wow.
General cleanliness. We talked a lot about those types of things. One thing that got brought up by one of our commenters was the idea of the staggered start to the Texas high school football season. If you remember, go back to like July when the UIL announced the plan for the 2020 Texas high school football season. And they said, we are going to start the small schools, 4A and below, on time. We're going to start it, I believe it was like August 28th.
Yeah, the last weekend
in August. We're going to run it all the way through. We're going to keep the same schedule as we originally had. For the big schools, 6A and 5A, we are going to delay it a month. They didn't start till the end of September, and of course the season ran all the way into January, which, believe it or not, was last month. There are, and the idea behind it was pretty, I think, easy to understand, which was we were in the middle of the pandemic. We're still in the middle of the pandemic, I should certainly say.
Pandy.
Still in the middle of the pandemic. But larger population centers were being hit harder than smaller population centers. And as a result, the bigger schools, 6A and 5As, tend to be concentrated in more large population centers. So the idea was let teams that tend to be more rural start playing, and then wait and hopefully things will calm down for the pandemic will calm down a little bit for the bigger schools a month later.
Right.
We can certainly have a conversation as to whether or not that was wise. We can certainly have a conversation as to whether or not that worked as they planned it, but that is what happened. And as a result, for the first 4 weeks of the 2020 Texas high school football season, we only had small school football. We only had 4A and below. 6A and 5A joined the party in late September. Now, the question is, should we keep something like that? A staggered season wherein the small schools go out there and play an extra or play earlier than the big schools. Here is, to me, the best argument for that. The best argument for that is whenever Texas high school football season rolls around. Yes, us here in the biosphere here at Dave Campbell's Texas Football.
I like that.
We pay attention to every classification.
Yeah.
Right? We're looking at 6A, we're looking at 1A, we're looking at 4A, all of them, all the classifications. John Q. Fan is probably paying attention only to the bigger schools. The bigger schools just get more ink and more attention than the smaller schools.
And that's just numbers.
That's just a natural thing, right? And I think you can make the comparison to what's going on in college football right now, which is in the fall, if Tarleton were to play their first Division I game at the same time that the Texas Longhorns were playing the Little Sisters of the Poor, a team that they're just going to drill, one of those games is, in my opinion, more intriguing. That's the Tarleton game. But that is not the game that is going to get the most attention.
No, not at all.
Texas Longhorns are going to swallow that whole simply because they are the big behemoth. They get more attention than all the other schools. Tarleton, as you may know, is playing in the spring right now. And Tarleton, I think, is getting a lot more attention right now
because they're not competing
than they would if they were playing in the fall because, as you mentioned, they're not competing for column inches, to use an antiquated term. They're not competing for airtime. They're not competing for eyeballs. They are kind of the only game in town right now. If you carry that over to the small high school football ranks, you would be shining a light and giving an opportunity for people to buy in and pay attention to small school football, which I think you and I both agree is awesome.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely.
So that's the best argument for it. The best argument against it is the end of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Because the best argument against it is at that point, if you go full staggered, if you say they're going to start 4 weeks or 2 weeks or however long before the other team, before the big schools, then that would mean, unless you do some jujitsu with the scheduling, you cannot have single site state championships games. Mm-hmm. Now, you can have them all played at the same site. That's what happened. 11 of the 12 ended up being, all 12 were scheduled to be played at AT&T Stadium.
Right.
11 of the 12 ended up being played at AT&T Stadium, but they were played on different dates. I will tell you, in conversations I've had with the UIL, they really like playing 12 games over 4 days. Mm-hmm. They like it being at one place and making it a festival of football.
Yes.
And so you cannot do that with the present structure that they had in 2020. So there's an argument for and against. I do think that there is a solution, and this was proposed. I want to give credit to Matt Stepp. He was the one who brought it up.
Yeah.
Which is, you start the small schools 2 weeks early. Mm-hmm. Okay? Right now, generally speaking, and I don't have the calendar in front of me, the Texas high school football season starts last weekend in August, mm-hmm. and it goes until the weekend before Christmas.
Yes.
That's a general rule. If you start the small schools 2 weeks early, mm-hmm. you can build in an extra bye week. You would have to build in 2 extra bye weeks. I think you give them one in the regular season. Mm-hmm. So basically, right now you have 11 weeks to play 10 games.
Yes.
Or up to 10 games. You would give them 12 weeks to play up to 10 games. Mm-hmm. Then you would also give them what six-man football already gets, yep. which is what I call Super Bowl week.
Yep.
Okay? Which is you play and then you have a full week off before you play again at the state championship games. Mm-hmm. At that point, you could still have the Central Site State Championship games at AT&T Stadium or at NRG Stadium or wherever they want to have them. Mm-hmm. You could still have the Central Site and the big festival of football, and everyone goes on time. You would make the 6A, 5A schedule stay the same. Mm-hmm. They begin the last week in August, go until Christmas. You would extend the small school football just a little bit. Yep. So, I don't know. Part of me doesn't like that all that much because I think that's a little bit of mental gymnastics mm-hmm. for a lot of people. And part of me, and this is, I freely recognize that I'm in the minority because I follow every team in the state. Mm-hmm. Part of me likes that when it's the area round week, it's area round for everybody. Mm-hmm. Yes, I know that it's not for six-man football, but it's still like the second round of the playoffs, right? They just have one fewer round. Part of me likes that. But I do think that there is a value in shining a light on the small school Texas high school football.
Right, and I think from being able, from us getting, obviously, yes, here we focus on every school, but I also do the Fox stuff where I am focused on one game a week specifically that I'm there on a Friday. And it was really stinking cool for those small school games for those first 4 weeks to get to go out and cover those towns, and they reciprocate it back to you as a reporter because they're excited that you're there because they know if, Duncanville and Cedar Hill are playing, there's no way that someone like them are going to get covered right then, and it's one of those things. I very much enjoyed that. I think the small schools really enjoyed it, so I think that there is value in trying to work to do that. And on the other side of it, if you're a big school snob and that's all you want to see, then that means the state semifinal games, there is nothing going on other than those games. So you get your time too. You don't just get to say that small schools get it all. But I think Stepp hit the nail on the head there. I think that's the best way to do it. I think those kids are already doing all their football stuff at that point anyway. So moving up a game a week or two doesn't really make that much of a difference. I think they would appreciate the week off before state. And I think that from a viewer perspective, it's really cool to get out of your comfort level, and maybe people who only focus on small schools, they're going to watch those state semifinals that last week in the Super Bowl week. So I think I think Steph hit the nail on the head
It's an interesting idea, and I don't know if I'm categorically opposed to it, and I want to make sure that I'm not letting – I tend to – this is the way I'm wired. I tend to let inertia get in the way of, like, we've always done it this way, so why would we change it? I think that necessity is the mother of invention. Obviously, we had to change the schedule in 2020 to make it work. I wonder if we can learn something from it and keep that around. It's an interesting idea. I'd love to talk with the UIL and people like that and see if that's something they would be interested in. And I'd love to talk with coaches and see if that's something they would be interested in, especially for small school coaches, because they would be the ones who would be the most impacted.
Right, yeah.
And I also think, here's another thing, and this is a small thing, but if you build in those extra 2 buys, we are dealing with schools with fewer numbers, right?
Right.
Does that give you an opportunity to get healthier?
Yes.
Does that give you an opportunity to build up your depth and make it so that so that you have more of your key players on the field?
Right. And then, because you're looking at it, and Italy is not going to have 99 kids on their rosters like Allen does. It's one. The other thing, one thing to say, though, I think our biggest thing here is we definitely, I feel like just speaking for you and I, would like everything to end at one time, though. Like, that's our biggest thing. The reason that we like this plan is because everything ends at one time. It's before you get into the mess of Christmas and all of that. Like, pushing it to where one thing happens a week or two after that.
No.
Oh,
no,
man.
I think I
don't want that.
I think you gotta be wrapped by Christmas. I think they made a one-time exception because they had to this year. I think you got to be wrapped by Christmas. I think that as big as Texas high school football is, it ain't as big as Christmas, and that's something that I think you need to be. That's got to be a firm stopping point.
Yeah, and again, we talked about this so much when they even suggested this. I felt bad for some of those basketball programs and stuff like that because they have guys that if they made their playoff run all the way into January, those basketball teams were lacking at that point. And in high school, that's just not the right thing. You can go to college and focus on one sport, but a lot of those guys, they need them for longer than that, It's
an interesting topic. Let us know what you think in the comments, and let us know on Twitter at DCTF. Whether or not the UIL should keep the staggered season. I think there's a compelling argument for and against, but one thing I would like to do is kind of ask Texas high school football coaches, especially the small school level, if that's something they'd be interested in. So.